very impressive work. And you're very glad you were here for anybody who's got any questions. So I definitely have questions I would like to ask the audience. Yes.
Hi. Since you interviewed both Indians and Pakistanis, I just had a question about how they understood partition. Because, I mean, I may be biased, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but because the partition demand came from the Muslim elite, their understanding of partition would have been different in the way the Indians the Indian refugees who traveled would have understood it. What I mean to say is that probably the Indian side, because my grandparents also come from the partition era and have experienced it, has always tried to repress it as a memory. Whereas I somehow understand that the Pakistani side has not repressed it so much. So do you think that there's a difference in the way partition has been understood by the two sides?
You know, it's very interesting because when I was starting this film, one of the main reasons I made this film is because there's very little done on the subject, and it's clearly, especially for that part of the world, extremely significant, and continues to, have relevance today, particularly through the conflicts like Kashmir. So that was one reason, and also because it directly related to 9/11 and the fact that the focus and the shift in terms of the world's attention had gone to Afghanistan and then was sort of ridiculously distracted towards Iraq. But I sort of felt at that time that there was going to be something was going to be happening in Pakistan, and I just felt that I needed to understand it more. So when I went there, and I spent about 2 years making this film. When I started talking about the issue of partition or trying to meet people to talk about it on the Indian side, I mostly was sort of dismissed and was sort of told, that's in the past and that kind of thing, or hasn't this been done before kind of thing. And in Pakistan, almost everybody I went to meet, to interview, or happened to meet, was quite eager and open and interested to have a conversation. So that was a very interesting immediate sort of difference that I experienced. And then there's a difference in terms of Pakistan really kind of establishing its identity and its sense of what it is and why it is. And as you can see in the film, and if you pay attention to current events there, it still is in some ways trying to figure that out, at least some people.
Any other questions? Okay, the time, do you film this between
2006 and 2007.
Because that's the time when after 2005 there's a ceasefire in India, Pakistan, kind of ceasefire, and then it's so many mutual understanding, the CDMs,
confidence building.
Yeah, mayors. So that's like militants reduced. When you mentioned the 3,000, now 150. When the army, the army is still semi-public. And how you see that with
well, when I went to do this, I had no idea, what to expect really, and it was, very strange luck for me that when I went to Pakistan to film, I was there. I went once in 2006 for about 10 days or something, just to kind of get a sense of whether or not I was going to be able to do anything. And then I went back in the early part, January, February, and early March of 2007. And, like he's pointing out, it was a relatively calm period, and some of the people I interviewed were very hopeful, and, that things would sort of be addressed and maybe even change between India and Pakistan. But by middle of March of 2007, the streets of Lahore were on fire, and then it just snowballed, and at the end of the year, the assassination of Bhutto. So it ended up being one of their worst years. But I was lucky in the time that I went there, because I was generally able to travel around. There was only one place I was not really given permission to go, but I went. That was into the Khyber Pass. That's why, you can also tell a big difference in the camera work. It's like I'm shooting out of a car rather than, being able to take my time. I jumped out of the car a couple of times and just grabbed a shot for 10 seconds and jumped back in. But, yeah.
But it's not only camera costs, you cannot get in Pakistan yet, and
well, I didn't actually try, but I suppose that might have been the case.
So what is the situation today? Are there discussions happening this year or something planned to change? Or is
there was, the surprise visit by Modi to Pakistan about a couple of months ago or so. But I don't think on a deep level these things are really changing anytime soon or really being seriously addressed. Part of that is external, part of that is the larger global political situation, and some of it is cultural, internal, religious. So I don't see much of not in the very near future. Unless it involved a lot of force.
I would like to thank you for the effort you've done in this movie, and congratulations on the work. My question is that how can you find a linkage between the situation, the crisis that you've seen when you were there, and crisis or the situation that's ongoing right now in Syria, or the Arab world, or the snake that goes from East Africa until West Asia or South Asia, and then goes into the other Arab region? Does it have a linkage between all of that conflict? Is there a union, a similarity?
Well, I think, the way I was sort of addressing the topic in this film, I was really looking at it philosophically. Really the idea of how history relates to us, what it means to us, how far do we go back in terms of what relates to us and what doesn't. Is it 50 years that's of relevance? Is it 5,000 years? And then how something, say, 60, now almost 70 years ago, created a ripple effect of conflict and continued problems in the region. How the sense of identity, the sense of whether or not we can really learn from these mistakes or of history. So why we are in what is called a frozen conflict. Kashmir situation is called a frozen conflict by the UN. And in that regard, nobody wants to live in a conflict zone. So, speaking of these people who are fleeing and trying to go elsewhere, they don't want to live in a conflict zone. And then some of those issues that they are created in their region also are outside and external influences. So, generally, would use some curse words here, but basically the global political situation and the way that politics worldwide really is not dealing with the serious issues and not really helping society to evolve.
Did you experience any difference between the relationship to the situation in the countryside compared to the city?
Well, for instance, areas along the border are very different than areas that are not along the border. So in Punjab, the state where I was born in Punjab in India, the area around the border is basically left to kind of fend for itself in the sense that it doesn't really get a lot of development funds, whether it's to do with roads or generally speaking. And then you always have like the presence of army or border security force or somebody is just there. It's part of your daily life, it's part of your visual, where you would not have that in other areas that aren't along the border. So you have these sort of constant reminders of the instability of the region, or the fact that you're in an area that is not as cared about as other areas by either the state or the federal government. So I mean that's one thing. And then in other parts, for instance in India, like in South India, they don't feel as connected to either the history of this or the present day. But like other parts of the world, they're actually really directly affected because it's a regional instability. It's about federal money going to certain things that maybe could be going to something else. So there are all kinds of ways that they're affected even if they're not right next to the hostility of the border.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question about like the improving relations between the two states. One of the people you interviewed said that there needed to be a push from the youth because they didn't really have
The UN.
the youth, no, not the UN, sorry, just improving relations between the states. They said they didn't have like the history of the violence. Or anything
Oh,
like
the
that.
youth. Oh,
Youth,
sorry.
yeah, sorry.
I'm not hearing that.
Yeah, but isn't there also the case that the youth don't really have the shared heritage as much? Which, like, I don't know if there's a chance that they're kind of going to get that over the years.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I included that point, but I didn't necessarily agree with the point. Because I feel that, even if they haven't, directly experienced that, they're dealing with the fallout from that all the time. And whether it is repression of histories or memories and not being able to have dialogue about something, and then so that becomes, it could become very judgmental, and so you kind of are instilled with a sense of that is the other and or the enemy or whatever. And in Punjab itself, they have the, as you saw in the film, the Wagah border ceremony, which is every single day, and it's all about symbolizing this hostility and almost encouraging this sense of being at war. And so, I mean, you're if you're there, you are imbibing this, and it's continued in a sense. And so, in a sense, it's not about like having directly experienced and having the scars, but it's about those things being carried on and translated in other ways of conflict or issues that create very also conflicted identities and conflicted maybe desires of the future. But there are some things, especially through the digital and internet and that social space, that people are able to, and of course outside of that region, people are able to meet and try to find ways forward.
I just want to ask you, come from the documentary filmmaking, it's not easy to get into both countries and do the filming. So being an American Indian, it's hard to be Indian. Indian is easy when you get in. How difficult was getting to Pakistan?
I don't know, strangely easy. And even like, I don't know, I've been there 4 times now. The first time I wasn't really sure if I was going to get, I got it. And I was pretty naive in this entire process. Like for instance, when I was in some of these areas, like one place in particular, it was just myself and the driver, and you might have, if you were paying attention, you saw this beautiful field of yellow flowers. It's the mustard plant, and this was in the northwest frontier, and it was the drive between Peshawar and Islamabad. And when I was leaving Peshawar, someone told me, make sure you see this bridge that's a little bit off of the main road. So we turned off the main road, saw the bridge, I'm filming, and it says no photography allowed, whatever.
But it's not each bridge there. So.
Yeah, so then I just sort of thought, let me just continue down this road a little bit and just see if there's anything in the countryside or whatever that might be nice. So we're riding along, and I don't know, 10, 15 minutes or something, and I saw that field of yellow, and I thought, oh, this would be really beautiful. So stopped and got out, and I'm walking across the road and walking into this field and filming. And the driver has a tripod, and we're walking, and just like as I showed in the film, as I'm walking through, we start to approach people who are working in the field. And he's filming, and this guy in kind of broken English said something to me about, like, why are you here or something. And for a second, I was wondering if I should respond in English or try to use my broken version of Urdu, which anyway would have given myself away. But I responded, I just tried to be very casual, and I just, I'm just like filming a little bit, whatever kind of thing. And then he was like, you need to leave. And I wasn't really sure if I should take it that seriously, but I tried to still be kind of casual and, just say, I'm just filming this over here. And then he was like, no, you need to leave. And I saw my driver was like starting to get scared, so I felt like if he's scared, then we better get out of here. But that was a moment that, as far as my identity as a woman, as somebody who is born in India and also American, it was not a very good combination. But anyway, I'm here.
So anywhere you were harassed or kind of stopped at the video display?
Well, it was difficult as a single woman. And I would not recommend doing what I did. I would say have one other assistant with you. But generally people are very hospitable, so,
I just want to give a comment and say thank you for showing this film. It's a very important narrative that you have preserved here, and I would guess that you have a huge empirical material also that is actually very important to preserve these voices from those who are alive and keep them, hear their stories, hear their experiences as far as they have from this horrible. I also want to just comment on how you have, from a religious studies perspective, which is so, I think you have managed to interweave a religious narrative into this story also. Religion and religious identity and religion and politics is the problem here throughout.
It's a problem in the U.S. too.
Yeah. but with the river Sutlej and Ulal and a picture of Ulal and local stories, I think there is a very strong message also in it that like Ulal in the Janamsaki stories is coming up from the Beas River, not just the Sutlej, but from the Beas River, saying there is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. And that narrative, everyone is pointing to this, that religion with politics is a problem, but it's also something that unites and humanity, like the story of humanity and the value of humanity is also very present in the narrative. And I see that Ulal comes back, and there was an image of Guru Nanak also, which, from a religious studies perspective, you become very, wow, here is something, here is the key core thing of these religions also in that area that is very interesting. So it was just shabash.
Yeah, I had about 180 hours of footage. I interviewed about 75 people, and I did whatever I could in terms of including people. And then some of the interviews are not in English, and I didn't really have this translator or anything, but that's there. And then I would say at least 4 or 5 people in the film are no longer alive. It was very important when I did the film to try to capture as many of the older generation as possible, because those were primarily the people who experienced it. Even if they were, say, 10 years old at the time, they would have had some kind of memory. And so there is the the need to talk to the younger generation and to look at what's going on now. But when I was doing this, my primary thing was really about capturing these voices that in a matter of a decade or so would no longer be. Like my aunt is here in the film, and so this, I interviewed her in, I think it was 2006, and there's no way I could, she's still alive, but there's no way I could do that interview now. And she was, central in the role of for the women who had been abducted. And so that was really important to hear people who were very hands-on with certain fallout and issues around the time. And then the people like academics who have done work on the topic. But primarily the goal was to work with people who had directly experienced it.
I think the motherly Paracali's mother recently passed away. I think a year or 2 years ago. So,
I'd like to ask you about time you said you focus more on the cultural way about the war and the reasons that ignited the war, about the conflict.
Can you speak up a tiny bit?
I'm asking about the reason that ignited the conflict between the two sides, and about the time before that how were the state and the Muslims and the Hindus were living? Were they living in harmony as all of the Disney World stories are? Like before the war we were living together and living happily ever after? Or were they always in conflict? And this claim made them have conflict more, that they led themselves into 50 years or the longevity of conflict that they can never resolve. Because all the war starts when it's in the middle, when it's all the bloodshedding happening. People will start saying that we were living in peace before, we were living in harmony before, we liked each other, we went into each other's places, and we had dinner at this woman's who was a Sikh, or this man who was a Sikh, and we had lunch at this Muslim guy. So was there any sense of that, or were there always conflicts, and there was no spark of that ignited that conflict?
Well, I think it's kind of a little bit about what you say in terms of there's a little bit of a sense of nostalgia to want to look at the past as being, great, peaceful, better than the present. And there was that. I mean, there are like certain pockets in certain areas, and in Punjab in particular, there's a the name of the place. It's begins with an M, and it's like 98% Muslim or something like that.
Maybe it's Muslim.
Yes, Muslim. Yeah. So during this time, when Punjab and Bengal were really at the heart of a lot of the violence, so this was somehow sort of untouched, and though it was largely, predominantly, almost 100% Muslim area. And that goes back from history and generations, something to do with Guru Gobind Singh, something's sons, or something like that. You might know better than I do. But there were these, instances of where communities were very diverse and they were essentially living okay. And then they were also governed more locally in the sense that there were either princely states or otherwise, and it wasn't one large confederation that was, except for the British, who were essentially for the last 100 and so years, 150 years or whatever, had that sort of more direct control over the parts of it. So there were more of an interest in whoever was particularly ruling that place to make sure there was a certain kind of harmony or whatever. And then in regards to the development and whether or not these borders created or exacerbated a situation, It's very hard to say. It seems on the surface, absolutely, because you were also dealing with the issue of Kashmir, where the two countries are vying. And then if you're talking about in terms of, evolving identities and identities being more aligned with a particular religion, whether it's on this side or that side, that may be tying into what is creating more of an issue, and that may not have been so present before if the communities were more diverse or more sort of localized as opposed to two large units. So I don't know, it's very hard to really make a call on that.
Can I add something? Can I say
Yeah,
something?
let us first.
I actually wanted to add on to your question also. First of all, thank you for all the hard work and for this documentary. In the documentary, they say that before independence, it was 100 years before independence, the tensions between the Hindus and Muslims started to come up. I wanted to know what was the reason behind those tensions. And I think it relates to this question as well. As far as I remember, something about 100 years.
Oh, well, at the end, I mean, it's talking about, there was like kind of 1,000 years of sort of living together kind of thing, but you're not referring to that.
Not specifically. Someone specifically said that it was 100 years. And I think it was before independence or maybe before the time of interview that there was tensions between the Hindus and... Because I, from my knowledge, and I'm not good at history, I always had an idea that because of the partition, there was pressures that land was being lost, and as you had mentioned in the documentary, that there were people fight, and there were people accounted, okay, this region had this many Muslims, this region had this many Hindus, and if Muslims are higher, then the Hindus are at a disadvantage, and that's why there was conflicts. But in the documentary, I think I heard 100 years before, so I never knew about that reason. I was wondering if you could share that.
You can answer.
I think it's because of the British rule, and when one imperialist occupied one land, they have to divide and rule. That's the symbol. That's what's happening.
I think it's from the political, introducing the electoral politics into the British India. That's when the Muslim League, and then they started taking more of politicizing the religion. And that's what he had.
The electoral process started in the 1940s.
No, it's 19 the Britain all that.
But these and all these were created in the beginning of the 20th century. So that's when this really became a harsh between different communities, when they polarized much more after the British had been there for some time.
Yeah. But there wasn't, at least even up until like 1946, Jinnah was buying property in Simla. So it's not like they had this 20, 30, 40 years of like a demand for a separate country. It was actually supposed to be the kind of a confederation. And it wasn't until the end that it was really meant to be more of a hard national border.
I think they made all the threats and all control system more stricter by 1909, 1910, somewhere around there. And that's where also all these national freedom fighters and so on came up and were of course sent to jail. But for many of them until the partition. But it became very heated. I think that's what.
Oh, actually, being a Kashmiri, I want to really thank you. You put Kashmiri narrative very clear. And when Hashim Quraishi is saying, we are living like a street dog, basically that it is. But India and Pakistan need land for the socialists, not the Kashmiris.
Yeah, that was a really hard segment because no matter what you do, somebody's going to be unhappy with how it's been presented, and that but I felt it was really important to keep it in the humanitarian space and in the space of how does what's going on there, whether it's the refugees from 1947 who are still in camps 60 years later, or the Hindus who were forced to flee, and the level of violence and the level of suppression on the part of the state, and the fact that it's just exist as this frozen conflict, that how that relates to some of the things that were happening at the time of partition in terms of the violence and the refugees and the, the sense of split identity or whatever. So it was important as I was learning more about it to show that history is repeating itself almost immediately within a generation kind of thing, and to keep it in that humanitarian space. And at the time it was the war in Iraq and everything, so that relationship of that crazy number of 700,000 or so forces in what it was as Uma Chakraborty says was considered a peacetime state, and yet there's 700,000 forces.
We just want to have seen how the Pakistani army, Pakistani issue as well. So it's a 1 million part of our reform in Kashmir. So it's not just India. That you were talking about.
Yeah. I just wonder, have you filmed screened in India and in Pakistan, and if so, how has it been received?
Yeah, I did screen in India right before I left, after I finished.
Yeah.
And I screened it in the north, in schools, as well as cultural venues and things like that. And, what was interesting is that when I was starting the film, people thought, oh, this has been done, and, I think people were also a little bit nervous about what kind of angle I might take, because it's still a contentious issue as a history, the emotional contention around it, the trauma, and then obviously the political stuff in regards to Kashmir. So it was interesting to me that once I made the film, then people then saw also the relevance of a film like this. At first they were dismissing it and thinking, it's been done, and why bother, that's in the past, all of that. But then when you see it, you realize that, because I also make the link for what's going on today, and also I just in one reference the U.S. involvement and the fact that it's really part of the global political stage. It's no longer regional, and and then in Pakistan, I was invited to screen it there, and I screened it in Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad. And when I went back, I wanted to be able to go to Peshawar because I had spent so much time there and I had interviewed people, and I felt I'd like to share this film there. But in the time that I had gone to film and in the time that I was invited back to screen, it had changed so dramatically that it went from basically one major event in a week to almost every day. So it was really not possible. I spoke with the gentleman that I had interviewed and asked him, if he would be able to arrange a screening, and he looked into it, and within a couple of days, he just said, it's really not a good idea for you to come up here. And then also, if you have a crowd of people, that's no matter what is going on, it could create a problem. So I was able to screen in Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad, and in Karachi, of all the screenings around the world, that was a really difficult screening, because afterwards there was a panel, 4 or 5 people, and the moderator was not really moderating, and actually encouraging. It was basically, arrows from the audience and arrows from 2 people on the panel, and that just kind of drove the whole thing. And people who were sort of a little bit disagreeing with that didn't feel comfortable enough to say anything. So it was really difficult, and I wasn't exactly sure why it was so hostile. And then I was told afterwards that basically because, as one Sindhi Pakistani gentleman in the film mentions, he references the MQM, which was the ruling party of the MQM is the party of refugees who had come across mostly from Bihar and UP. And that is, I believe it was a largely that type of audience in seeing the film, and so I felt maybe a little targeted. So that was, But I was also there when I was in Lahore when the Taj Hotel was attacked in Bombay. So it was November 2008, and it shows you, just like how fragile the entire situation is. So I'm sitting there and within a very short time frame, the language about going to war and this kind of thing, and I'm like, Lord, and I'm like, oh God, this is all I need now. But anyway, after a few days, it didn't escalate, and when I screened it in the universities on both sides, the students were actually very emotional in thanking me for having done this, because on both sides, in both countries, the history is very manipulated in the books. History of partition is like a paragraph. When you think about the travesty, the trauma, the numbers of people, the scale, for that part of the world, it's one of the most significant events ever. So they got an opportunity to also see from the other side, hear from the other side, and see, the landscape and just get a cultural sort of picture also. And so I also kind of really made it with that audience in mind.
Maybe we take a couple of more questions and then we jump to your next project.
No, that's up to you
Yeah?
all, what you feel. So it might be a little intense, So I'm feeling it's a little intense. But the other film I have to share is about 10 minutes, and it's an absolute work in progress. I've just finished a fiction feature film, which is also about this region, and also looking at Kashmir, India, referencing Pakistan, but it's done very symbolically. It's told through, sort of fictional methods. And while I was filming that, I also went back to Kashmir and was able to film a tribute memorial concert to the last known Sufi master of a certain type of music. And his sons he just passed away a month before I came to Srinagar, and they were giving a private tribute concert, so they allowed me to come, and I was able to film that, and that would be made into a longer piece, at least 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's about 10 minutes. So that just kind of continues in some of the same vein that I worked in with these two larger films. I don't feel like it's too intense. I don't know. Up to you all if you feel like seeing it.
Is it possible to buy a DVD of your film?
Yes, it is.
Here or there?
Yeah. So I leave that up to you all if you want to see it, but it's a work in progress. Yeah. Okay. We'll do the Kashmir one. It's on the
Well, thank you very much for being in this meeting. I mean, I'm a Sufi myself, and I'm very impressed here from this. So, because maybe Jeff Berger a bit knowledge more, I found one East Pakistan's, Google seminar last month in Swas in London, and it was organized by the School of Music in Swas. And the Rachel Harris is the head of the music department in Swas. And her research is East Pakistan, Mohammed, Uzbek, and it's unpollinated. So it's our community, and we are very close linked. It's more related. Yeah. Is any question?
Did that belong to a specific culture?
Specific.
To a specific or a target?
I guess so. I mean, what I've written here is pretty much what I understood. He did a certain style of Sufi music, and he's and most of the people who were performing were either his sons or his grandsons, or so they were doing a tribute concert. They would always perform with him, but he would be sort of the lead.
But they don't know which order.
It's Turkish fund. Yeah. So it's more towards simplicity.
How come you decided to have black and white? Is that
Yeah, because I've just been working in black and white a lot, and my new film is black and white, and so I'm just doing everything in black and white now for the last maybe 5 years. I really love it. I don't even think about color. And it's also kind of interesting because in South Asia you think so much about color. I mean, especially certain places it's so like hot pinks and oranges and all kinds of things like that. But, so I kind of like the idea of taking away that strong association. But I just love black and white. I think it's so evocative, and I like the feeling that it kind of crosses time.
Isn't it more difficult for you because you need to have sure you get the contrast and all the grains?
Actually, sometimes it's easier because even if you just have one source of light, then that gives you, like you don't have to set up any lights or anything like that to kind of create a certain mood. You can actually create mood very easily with black and white. So in some ways, it's actually easier.
I want to ask, why did you call it like intense? You said at the beginning before we.
No, meaning that after that long film, which has so many things, and there's so much.
I thought emotionally for you, it's like a really heavy memories, maybe or flashbacks, or the music, or the Sufi, the Makam music.
Oh no, I just felt after that it might be like too much then to take on more, of something else.
It was the great finalizing of the event today. It's like calming us down.
That's good. That's good. Well, I'd like to be able to work. This is just a sketch. Like I just started editing and putting something together based on the footage I have. I've also done another one that's about 10 minutes long with music in Lahore with this. He was in my documentary. The man was smoking all the time and saying, he has 1,000. He's lived in South Asia for 1,010 years and stuff like that. He's really one of Pakistan's most esteemed lawyers. And he also has used a lot of his money to create a foundation dedicated to philosophy, music, I think science, but mostly philosophy and music. And in 30 years, he worked on a prototype for a new instrument, which is like a sitar. It's sort of a derivative in some ways of that and another instrument. And his idea behind it was to find a way to inspire the younger generation to be interested in classical music. So after 30 years, he felt that his prototype was basically ready, and his daughter, who was in her 60s, who was a sitarist, was the one who would work with him in refining the sound and that kind of thing. So I made a small film because I was filming with them for other things, and so that one is about 10 minutes too. And, so both of those are addressing the idea of how this type of music might survive in the century, may or may not survive for different reasons. So
it's very advanced in Egypt. This type of music. It's very common and popular in Egypt and the surrounding areas.
Hindustani classical or this Sufi.
The Sufi maqam.
Yeah. That's cool.
Well, each country uses different instruments.
Yeah, exactly.
But these instruments are more Central Asian.
Yeah.
Eastern
Well,
sounds
from-
like
Yeah,
Chinese,
they give particular
voices.
voices. Yeah.
So it's and the big study is the opposite string instruments.
It's regarding the topic of the Sindhis, especially the Sindhis in the topic. It looks like they are not really happy with what they got, moving from Pakistan to India.
Well, it's like sort of the refugees today where they're kind of scattered across wherever they can go. That's kind of what happened with the Sindhi Hindus when that was an interesting case because in 1947, when others were having to flee because of large-scale violence and transfer of, this becoming majority Muslim, this becoming majority Hindu Sikh, in Sindh it was relatively quiet and there was almost no violence. And until around early part of 48, when people came in primarily from Bihar and UP and kind of forced people to leave their properties. So then that's when their migration mostly happened, was like many months after partition. And then when they left, they didn't have, like in Punjab, they weren't going from one side of Punjab to the next. They were going wherever they could go, and some landed in Bombay, and they created, you'll see a housing complex that'll say like Sindhi refugee housing or something like that. And then the one woman in here was singing about Gandhidham. That was a brand new community that was created in the Gujarat, Kutch area, where a number of them settled and created their own new township. But then, they kind of moved all over, so they didn't really create a large community where they kind of dominated or where they were, so that sense of, sort of becoming a very fragile community in terms of your religion, in terms of your maintaining your history or those kinds of things, they were really affected by that. And so that was a very different sort of result than like some other places where they were able to move to areas where they were already sort of speaking the same language and things like that. Although I was told that between Sindhi and Kutchi there's only a few words kind of difference, that there's a lot of overlap with the language. But still, as he points out, you're moving from a very fertile area to an area that is like, there's a reason people haven't really settled there. But they made it work.
They think that, they were good, Sindhis are in Mumbai city, they are certainly doing well in the city.
By and large, I think as a community they've done well, or they've always done well. It doesn't take away from their the plight of being, fragmented all over and not having a cohesive kind of place. We all deal with that, especially if we are, in the modern culture, very nomadic and moving around in different places, that you fracture those roots, bonds, that kind of connection to either place or people. And in that part of the world where tradition and ritual and things like that is so important on your day-to-day life, it's even more of an impact. And so it's kind of interesting for like Sikhs in Punjab. Some of their most sacred sites are on the other side of the border, and they may or may not get the visa to visit and to go to that place. So I don't know. The countries are trying to create more of a pilgrim, giving visas for pilgrims, whether they're going for a day or something like that.
Would you like to tell us more your time scale or what you're up to now? When you're going to finish it or...
Well, if anybody's in London on March 1st, I have the world premiere of my new film, which is, what's the best word? Experimental. It's a black and white art film starring two of India's most esteemed actors. So I have the world premiere on March 1st, and I'm nervous, excited, whatever. It's like this, no one has really seen it except for a handful of people, and something very, very different, and also for these actors to see them in something that is not like high melodrama or whatever. To see them in something where I'm really paying attention to the idea of constructing the image and the movement, and really looking at the aesthetics and how, a scene is constructed, as opposed to, really focusing primarily on the development of story or narrative. That's actually was like the last on my list. Although there is like a thread and there's something happening, but the sense of, you following a story and getting to some place with it was not the primary reason behind the film. So, if you know anybody in London, tell them.
Where are you in London, by the way?
Huh? Oh, at the Victoria and Albert Museum.
And who are the actors?
Yeah, who are the actors?
I forgot. Om Puri and Lilette Dubé. So they both worked with a lot of international cinema and art film or independent film, but this is like a step beyond that. It's more in the sort of, the fine art world kind of thing.
So you were the writer or producer?
Everything. Which is, kind of like, I don't know, I kind of like it in a sense because you have, ultimate control over so many things, but it's also absolutely exhausting. And there's a reason why it's a collaborative medium. Although there is a Portuguese film director that I've recently kind of come across his work, and I really like his style so much. He's essentially always sort of three-person crew. So he works very low scale and very, very fast. It appeals to me. That's the same like when I made the documentary, I was working entirely on my own, and there were benefits to that because if you are going to interview somebody, you can set up very quickly, and then you're also less intimidating and less formal, and you're kind of more immediate. And they also thought I was a student, so it helped that they didn't feel the kind of pressure that they might have if it was BBC or something. So there are benefits to that, but then, then everything is on you. So I was having to think of my questions and follow whatever they're saying, and also think about how my camera is and hoping that the sound is okay and all that stuff. But you're also able to, kind of do what you want, not worry, did the camera person manage to get that, or, that kind of thing.
But how long you worked with this film?
The new film?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's years. It's since about 2008 I started writing, and then it went through many different variations because my initial one was going to be a period piece in the 1930s, and then that became extremely impractical because, to do a period piece really right, you have to have a very decent budget to make it really recreate that feeling. So it just went through many different versions down to whatever was at that point manageable. And then I filmed it in stages because part of it was in Pakistan, majority was in India, a bit in, I did one scene in New York, but it's not down New York. And then a good section was in Kashmir. And I had to do it sort of around when the actors were available, and also when I had a bit of funding. So it was done in stages, and so that was over from 2012 to 2014 was the filming, and then I spent about a year and a half on edit and sound design.
Tell us more about the funding problem. Because that's
the stuff nightmares, but no, I don't know. It's it's just really, really difficult. Is all I can say.
Sure it is. Yeah.
But I literally pounded the pavement and found all kinds of ways that I could. Well, yeah, cutting costs because I was also functioning a lot on a lot of different roles. But my main key with the funding was really to pay people who were involved, whether they were crew or cast, because especially on lower scale things, people tend not to pay. And they say, oh yeah, we'll give you credit or whatever, this kind of thing. And I just don't feel that it's ultimately not really fair. And I don't really want to, encourage that if I don't, So I worked really hard to try to raise funding because I had made this documentary, I already had a really good sense of places I wanted to go, what I wanted to do, and when you're filming like that, with just a few people, and you have a small camera, you can manage things that you couldn't if you were a larger crew or you had a larger camera. So you could grab things and do things pretty easily without permission. In Kashmir, it was just myself and my actor. And I was designing it on the spot. I had an idea, and I did have a script, but I had to kind of I couldn't do those scenes because it would have involved a lot more. So I was just taking the ideas from those scenes, and just as we passed something, I'm going, oh yeah, that looks great, let's go do something there. So it was a good half of the film is involved, which just became the best part of the film rather than the scripted stuff.
How long was that speaking?
That is about almost 50 minutes, something like that.
So where else you were speaking?
I'll go to Germany after that, and planning for the fall for New York. Let's see. Hope that I'll be back in this part of the world soon.
Sure.
So, good.
Thank you very much for everything.
Mr.